there aren't very many other industries that are so passion driven.
Yeah.
So for us to be able to bring our passion of science as well and combine it with our passion of beer to, push beer forward. And, it's this ancient technology. And I feel so honored to be in this position where we can be collaborating with people like you guys.
Welcome to HenHouse Unruffled, an audio companion to the beers of HenHouse Brewing Company. Each episode, we'll take a deeper dive into each beer's concept, recipe, can art, sensory, and more with your hen host, Fridge.
What up? What's up, Unruffled listeners? It's Fridge, your host for the HenHouse Unruffled podcast. Today, my co-host Bob and I are sitting down with HenHouse production team member Mike Guilford, as well as Nick Harris from Berkeley Yeast. We're talking all about the magic of thiol-releasing yeast, specifically Vermont Tropics, in our brand new blonde ale, Synth Life. So get ready to learn all about the history of Berkeley Yeast. And fair warning, y'all, this episode is particularly science-y. Without further ado, let's get it going. What's up, Unruffled fam? We are here with Mr. Nick Harris of Berkeley Yeast. Super stoked to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for the beer too. Delicious.
Absolutely. You're one of the co-founders of Berkeley Yeast, correct?
I am, yeah.
Awesome. Would you mind introducing yourself to the lovely listeners of Unruffled?
Yeah, so my name's Nick. I grew up in Colorado, and I went to school in Maine originally, and then came out to California for grad school, where I attended UC Berkeley. I got my PhD in microbiology in Wenjun Zhang's lab. She studies natural product discovery, so that's discovering new molecules in the natural world. And so, number one, discovering these new molecules and figuring out how they're produced enzymatically. So uncovering new chemical logic, they say. So new ways that enzymes could be functioning to pull off crazy new chemical reactions.
Wow. Fascinating. Yeah. We are super stoked on Berkeley Yeast in general. We're frequent collaborators with y'all. We have a lot of my favorite beers that we've ever made using your product.
Big Chicken 22. I mean, there's no better way for us to say HenHouse loves you than to use one of your ingredients in Big Chicken.
Feel honored. That was a delicious beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're super stoked to work with you guys. And it's always awesome to have a brewery basically work their magic to highlight a yeast to the best of its, potential, make it taste as good as it possibly can. And I think you guys do that with every beer. So,
I mean, I almost didn't want to even dry hop Big Chicken this year.
Right?
It was so good right beforehand. It was remarkable what this yeast can do.
Yeah.
That is awesome. The Vermont Tropics is what we used in Big Chicken 22, and it was actually used for the first time ever in one of our batches of Many Worlds. Is that correct?
That's how I understand it. Yeah. I was told that we got that yeast as it was total R&D. It was we've used Tropics before, but we were internally calling it Conan Tropics because we use a lot of Conan, not actually Conan. It's Barbarian from Imperial Yeast, but it's based on Conan. It goes and goes. But yeah, we were told that was the first run of that yeast. Yeah, it was good too.
Yeah, we actually made that yeast strain for you guys. So we had been collaborating a little bit. I think you guys were started off using Galactic, the Chico yeast that produces lactic acid for sour beers. And then you had been dabbling with our London Tropics, which is actually our flagship strain. Yeah. And then maybe it was you, Mike. I can't remember. But,
because I really, I do love that London, the original Tropics. I'm a little bit of a fan of drier beer, and those beers, no matter what, any kind of those London, are heavier beers.
Yeah.
And I like to drink lots of beers, so sometimes it gets a little too heavy. And that was when I was like, what if we could just get Conan, and get those same crazy flavors, but finish it out a little bit more, make it a little more, in my opinion, drinkable.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of drinking, we're all drinking a brand new blonde ale from HenHouse, one that I'm super stoked on in general, but label-wise, one of the coolest labels I've ever seen as well. Josh Staples killed it. I am a sucker for anything synth and synthwave, vaporwave, any of that stuff. I listened to Dungeon Synth whenever I play D&D, so this one's got me going. And our hen is wearing a Bach Boculus Rift, which is super sweet. The beer itself is, of course, Synth Life, and this beer is sort of science-y driven. In that's not the most eloquent way to say that, but we aren't doing normal things that we would do with a blonde ale or a hop-driven beer. We're not doing any dry hopping with the Cascade in this beer. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that's correct. We were trying to let this yeast kind of... It's an interesting thing because it's not actually the yeast expressing itself. It's the yeast expressing what's in the wort.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very interesting thing. It's not like you get Belgian yeast to make Belgian flavors. Like, this is just opening up the flavors that are like hidden in there.
We're bringing out the tropical aroma encoded in the barley. That's kind of how... and that's the story I've been telling myself.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So it turns out that barley, and I'm sure a lot of plants in nature as well, have the potential to be tropical, but they're not typically tropical on their own. And so basically they have these precursor molecules that once released or broken down by an enzyme can release these crazy tropical aromas and flavors that you're now getting in this beer. So those huge like guava passion fruit notes that are in this blonde ale that you would typically get from dry hopping with a bunch of, let's say, Nelson or Mosaic, you're now getting just primarily from the barley. Hops also have some of these precursors, and just get super sciencey really, really quick.
Get it.
Is that the major precursors that people are talking about are these glutathioneolated thiols or sustainolated thiols. So glutathioneolated 3-MH is the predominant one that you find in barley, as well as in most hop cultivars. And then the yeast is this Vermont Tropics or Conan Tropics, that the only difference between this yeast and your standard Conan or Vermont is that there's one additional gene. And that gene encodes an enzyme, and in this case, it's encoding an enzyme called carbon sulfur lyase. And what this enzyme
really getting Bob going right now.
Oh, dude, it's pretty awesome. It breaks carbon sulfur bonds, and so a thiol is just a sulfur-containing molecule.
Right.
Thiols can be perceived at very low concentrations, and some of them are not nice smelling. The smell of natural gas is actually a thiol. They spike it into natural gas so that you can smell it.
Right.
And you can think of, the smell of skunks. That's a sulfur-containing compound, or cannabis. If I see Mike looking at me.
What's he talking about?
We've done some experimenting in our youth. I mean, we're in Sonoma County here.
Sure. I've seen other people do it.
I'm going to experience for the research later this evening.
And so those are all sulfur compounds, and a lot of these compounds that you get in those great smelling hops like Nelson, those have those same sulfur-containing compounds, but specifically the ones that smell like guava passion fruit, not the ones that smell like natural gas. And so the yeast is very good at releasing the nice-smelling sulfur-containing thiols from, again, barley and hops. And so that's why you can take a recipe that, if this were fermented with normal Conan or Vermont, it wouldn't taste like these tropical fruits. But when fermented with this yeast, because that yeast is producing this carbon sulfur lyase, it's releasing quite a bit of these tropical tasting thiols. So
very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, with when thiols are related to craft beer, consider me a thiol thought, over here.
Yeah.
Big ups on these. I love pretty much everything that has anything to do with releasing thiols from HenHouse that I've tried, because they don't let me get out very much, so I'm basically only drinking HenHouse beer. And when the thiol releasing beers come through, I get really excited. How did you get into this? Like, how did you become a glutathione gangster? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, good question. So at Berkeley Yeast, we actually started our journey with thiols almost 5 years ago. And so what we were doing is we were looking at what are the flavors that people actually like in beer, breaking down beer to its chemical level. So we kind of see beer as being a mixture of molecules, like a very complex mixture containing thousands of different types of molecules. And we know that, beer has really taken off in the past decade or so. And beer is also, different breweries like HenHouse have converted the non-beer drinker into the beer drinker because they're pushing out beers that are more tropical or tasting more like juice, if you will, like these hazy
Totally.
IPAs that taste like pineapple, mango juice. I think that's, converted a lot of people into liking beer. And so we went after those flavors. We're like, how can we generate yeast strains that are releasing more of what people want? And we very quickly realized that thiols are largely responsible for those flavors. And so about 4 years ago then is when we started first making different thiol releasing yeast strains.
Right.
And we started off taking Chico ale yeast and plugging in different carbon sulfur lyses that yeast already have and just turning up their expression or just blasting the production of the enzymes that yeast already have. So there are a few different enzymes that yeast already encode. Like IRC7 is one that's gotten a lot of interest recently. STR3 is another one. And so we made yeast strains that were producing varying amounts of these two enzymes trying to push tropical flavors, but we weren't really amplifying the tropicalness of the beer to an extent that we thought was, I don't know, at the time it just wasn't that impressive, I guess. And
Did you find any that amplified skunk and or terrible aromas?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually did find some enzymes that would make the garlic, onion-like flavors, those sulfur compounds. So we actually have a whole beef soup line of yeast strains hidden in the -80 in the
Savory
cryogenic freezer.
IPAs coming at you, 2024.
Yeah. Those were pretty wild. And then I wouldn't say we stumbled upon it, but we identified a highly active enzyme that is now in Vermont Tropics, and that came from the bacterial world. So it actually comes from a probiotic called Citrobacter. So we all right now are releasing thiols inside of us. I mean, we have the exact same gene inside of us that's in Conan or Vermont Tropics.
I love it.
Yeah, and that's partly why we chose it too. Is it's something that's food safe. It's something that we already have. So in terms of safety, it's not so foreign. It's not from Mars or it's not from somewhere where we can't understand. Even though I think that genetics is fairly simple in that one gene will encode a single enzyme, and that enzyme will typically carry out a single type of reaction. And so it's pretty easy to know what a gene, what the outcome is going to be when you're doing genetic engineering. So even if it did come from Mars, I'm sure it would be fine. But in terms of making people feel better and safer, I think it helps to be using something that's already a probiotic. So.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So Nick, I'm curious a little bit more about your specific background in school. Like, what did you study to end up where you are today with Berkeley Yeast?
Yeah, well, I went to a very small school for my undergraduate degree, which was in Bar Harbor, Maine. The school is called College of the Atlantic. It's 350 students total.
That's a small school.
Small school. Yeah. It's on an island, actually. You can drive onto the island, but in the middle of winter, there's nobody there. There's literally just the school, one grocery store, one bar, one police officer. It's that type of place, During the summer, there are millions of people that show up to visit Acadia National Park, and then there are, 50 bars and and too many people. It feels like you're in California. So there, you're able to, at College of the Atlantic, you kind of can guide your own educational path pretty easily. Everybody gets the same degree. It's all in human ecology, which is loosely defined as the interactions between humans and their social and natural environments, or how humans interact with the world. So whatever you study, you kind of ask yourself, why does this matter? Yeah, it was pretty cool. So I ended up studying chemistry, but with the sole purpose of trying to understand how to be a better brewer. So I did a lot of independent projects on beer, and at the time I also saw beer as being, this mixture of different molecules, chemicals, and I had this idea that if I could figure out what the exact mixture of molecules is, like I could imagine the best beer in the world and try to that didn't exist at the time, but if I could imagine that and figure out what chemical composition would get me there, then I could figure out how to reverse engineer it to make that beer. I wasn't thinking of genetic engineering, but I was thinking about manipulating the process to produce different compounds for molecules. And so during these independent studies, I would brew a batch beer every single week and try to push different off flavors, like try to make diacetyl, try to make H2S, try to... And so that's kind of what got me through school was, I took a lot of chemistry classes trying to better understand beer. And then after that, I started a biofuel company that was doing fermentation to produce a biofuel called butanol, which is a drop-in replacement to gasoline. So, but you use a bacterium called Clostridium. It's an anaerobic process, but you use fermenters. And so anyways, I did this for a little bit and built a small biofuel facility out in Colorado, and then realized I didn't know how to use the equipment very well. So I worked at a small brewery in Austin, Texas called Black Star Co-op. I was the first brewery co-op in the U.S. So got experience, running CIPs and using pumps. And then from there, I realized I didn't know anything about the microbes actually inside of the fermenter. I didn't know anything about this Clostridium. So then I applied to grad school to learn more about the inner workings of microbes. And so the lab that I joined, Wenjin Zhang's lab, at the time she had grant funding from BP to study Clostridium and some other organisms to spit out biofuels. Lost funding from BP as biofuels started to tank about whatever this was 8 years ago. So then I switched my focus to study tuberculosis for a little bit. Anyways, long story short is that I ended up meeting the other co-founders of Berkeley Yeast. They were studying terpene biosynthesis for biofuels in Jay Kiesling's lab, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, who's one of the founders of synthetic biology, which is manipulating microbes to produce useful chemicals. Wow. And so they were studying terpene biosynthesis. They made some prototype strains that could produce hoppy flavors because a lot of hops are driven by the terpenes that they're producing. So a lot of those floral citrus flavors that you get in hops, those are terpenes. And so they produced in this lab, in Jay Kiesling's lab, they produced different yeast strains that could produce these floral citrus aromas and flavors by producing linalool, geraniol, and citronellol, which are the three primary flavor determinants of Cascade hops.
Absolutely.
And that was kind of the start of the company, was making those prototype strains. And anyways, I got on board just by knowing the co-founders, Charles Denby and Rachel Lee. And now we're making Vermont Tropics.
I love it.
Wow. It's amazing. And if you didn't have experience with beer and brewing, would this concept have ever come together?
I think so. Charles and Rachel, they were both. Rachel does a lot of fermentation at home. She does a lot of bread making, especially. Cool. She's a total foodie. And then Charles was also a home brewer, so I'm sure that they would have also pulled it off. But I'm very grateful to be a part of the team. And I think we're all just so passionate about both science and beer, and so when you love what you do and we're just combining two passions. And so I think that's why we get up and we push it so hard every day and are trying to make useful products. And we care a lot about the beer industry. And I'm so grateful that we're a part of this. And it's such a good industry,
Totally.
and it's an industry of passion. People aren't here to make a bunch of money. They're here because they love beer and they love brewing and they love the people side of it. And there aren't very many other industries that are so passion driven.
Yeah.
So for us to be able to bring our passion of science as well and combine it with our passion of beer to, push beer forward. And, it's this ancient technology. And I feel so honored to be in this position where we can be collaborating with people like you guys, and cranking out beers like this that we couldn't have imagined a few years ago.
Definitely pushing forward in a way that has never been done before, right? There's new hop varieties, which honestly only as of last decade or two, was even on a label,
Absolutely.
I mean, early in my career, it's not like you were highlighting a beer's hop varietals,
right?
And now it's it's on every label. These are the hops that are in it.
Yeah.
Barley, this day and age, barley doesn't quite get the sexy labeling that hops does, but honestly, a lot of local.
Right.
A lot of local growers, local monsters is starting to make its way on there and starting to show up as being this was grown here. And this is, yeast goes back, a long ways, but still it's this interesting effect that this yeast is not creating these flavors. It's just opening them up, blows my mind.
Yeah.
And this beer tastes nothing like it would without that single enzyme in this yeast strain, which is
absolutely not.
It's crazy. Blows my mind.
It is incredible. And I just love that you three originally who founded Berkeley Yeast were coming at it with this ecological mindset. You wanted to make people think about the environment and, the fact that, hop cultivation is in trouble with the way that things are going. And, this is something that is both highlighting the need for us to help where we can with the environment, but also coming up with a solution for us to continue on with the amazing passion and love that is craft beer.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this yeast will help create a more sustainable and robust hop economy, because a lot of those hops that we've come to love, those were bred for their flavors and aromas, but they don't necessarily have, they're not drought tolerant necessarily. They're not resilient to pests. And so I believe, we have to do some more research into this, but I bet we can find hops that are both drought tolerant, disease resistant, that also have a lot of those precursors to these styles.
Yeah.
And then when fermented with a yeast strain that possesses this enzyme, they can become just as tropical as those hops that are bred for their aroma properties. So I think that, like, when I look into the future, I imagine that people will be planting hops that are more robust to climate change, and then hop farmers won't be at the whim of climate change. They'll have big harvest every single year.
Right.
And then when fermented with the right yeast, they can push beer in the direction that everybody wants that beer to be in, which is that tropical, have all those nice tropical aromas and flavors.
So are there a multitude, how many of these precursors are in there? Is this like finding one single compound, or is there a whole variety of compounds that this yeast strain is taking advantage of?
This yeast is specifically releasing thiols from these glutathioneated and cystinylated compounds, and there are a few different types of those. So some of the thiols people talk about are like 3MH, which is like 3-mercaptohexanol. For instance, there's a 4MP, which is whatever 4-methylpentan.
I actually
like
should
a
know that
chemistry
one, but
quiz,
I don't.
but yeah.
No, 4-MMP is on the tip of my tongue, but I don't got it.
Yeah, there's 3S4MP, and then there are the ester forms of some of those that also exist, but I believe that they all originate from a glutathioneated or cystinylated precursor form, which this yeast should be able to release. But the predominant precursor that we see across the board in everything that we've analyzed has been glutathioneated 3MH. 3MH, once it's released, is guava passion fruit. So guavas, for instance, have a ton of this compound. And then the acetate, or the ester form of 3MH, 3MHA, is also extremely guava passion fruit, and it's also perceived at a lower flavor threshold than 3MH. So this yeast is very good at releasing 3MH, which is why this is so predominantly guava passion fruit. Yeah. It's also good at releasing 4MP, which is more like box tree, like diesel-like character, but there's just less of that precursor in barley and hops.
And that's kind of where we're getting that little hint of cannabinoid dankness or cannabis dankness,
Yeah, that's probably from 4MP. That's my guess. That's what I get, and I get that in I get that in a lot of Phantasm beers too, as a similar type dankness. And you get it in Sauvignon Blancs from New Zealand too, and I mean other wines as well. It's not just Sauvignon Blanc, but
my first whiff of this, I was like, "Yo." New Zealand Sauv Blanc for sure.
Yeah. For those wines, I always get a lot of grapefruit, which also is predominantly driven by thiols.
Yeah.
There are other compounds that are perceived as grapefruit, but I think in large part, a lot of the tropical fruits have high amounts of thiols. And when I say high amounts, I'm talking micrograms per liter.
Wow.
Not like megs or grams per liter,
Right.
But flavor threshold for these thiols is low parts per trillion, so that's nanograms per liter.
Yeah.
So very low, but this beer I bet you is probably around 10 micrograms per liter, somewhere in there. So parts per billion, not parts per trillion.
Wow.
And I don't think you want it, you could probably double this and still be okay, but at some point, you probably don't want much more tropical flavor.
I was kind of wondering, there's got to be some kind of balance point where, if it's, because this beer in and of itself is, just Pilsner malt with a tiny bit of Cascade in there, right? So I figured there's nothing getting in the way, right? No dry hops. I am kind of curious as to how high you can go before it becomes a bit too much, it's overwhelming almost.
There's also that, weird trick with concentrations where like a little bit of a molecule is like, oh, this is like that particular flower. A little more, you're like, oh, it's that great stone fruit. And then you're like, here's a little more. And you're like, oh, a buffalo's rectum. Yeah, I hate this. Yeah, it's weird like that. And also, for the deep nerds and Cicerone candidates listening along, the 4-MMP is the black currant character in beer, sometimes referred to as caddy, but also dank and cannabisy, for those who don't want to say tomcat urine, as Dr. Charles Bamforth loves to pronounce it.
Yeah. I also think that, you can increase the concentration in a beer that's more heavily hopped. I think flavor thresholds go up by quite a lot when you start tossing on, whatever it is, 4 to 6 pounds per barrel of hops and, on the cold side.
Yeah.
It could just be that hops have a ton of terpenes. They have a lot of other grassy compounds, like different aldehydes, for instance, not like trans 2-nonenal, like the paper flavor, but like hexenal, for instance, that I think can kind of wash out thiols. There's some discussion that maybe thiols are readily degraded or they're absorbed by the hop material. It's hard to say, you can figure that out with analysis, but I think that in large part it might just be that adding more hops, it's kind of putting a blanket of flavor over these thiols. And so you could perhaps, double the amount of thiols in this beer, and it might be too much in a blonde ale, but, with 4 pounds per barrel, like maybe you want to double it again to really get it to sing. So.
Right.
So, like, theoretically, are there other undiscovered enzymes that could produce different types of flavors with the, producing the thiols, such as like stone fruit or like Concord grapes or stuff like that?
I think that a lot of those flavors might be different compounds. Like stone fruit, I think are primarily lactones. Grape, I think can be like furanone or like furaniol, for instance, can be grape-like. The Concord grape synthetic flavoring, is something I can't remember what it is right now, but some ketones, for instance, will kind of taste like raspberries, if you will. So there are all different flavor types. Not all of them are thiols, of course, but there are probably other enzymes out there that are better releasing certain types of thiols. And then, of course, there are enzymes downstream that you can manipulate to then change those thiols. So like if you wanted to push more 3-MHA, for instance, the acetate form of 3-MH, like that's another enzyme that would be responsible for that chemical reaction. I think in terms of manipulating flavor of a beer that has Vermont Tropics or any of the other tropic strains is that manipulating the precursor content or type of precursor in there. So that might be using different types of barley or different hops or maybe something else that you find at the grocery store. More analysis work is needed. So a lot of this is done with mass spectrometry. So doing extracts from different plants and then looking at what precursors are available. So that might be one way of pushing it, but there's certainly a whole world of enzymes out there that are each capable of producing different molecules or different molecule types, and each of which might have different flavors.
So. Very cool. Well, I know HenHouse is down for helping y'all out with more research and development.
Awesome.
And such things.
Definitely. Like I was saying,
we're down too. Yeah.
Like I was saying to Fridge before we started recording, folks who are listening, I don't know when you are. I'm not even sure when I am some of the time. But at the time of this recording, we're pretty close to putting out another Tropics beer, and then we will have a bunch of Tropics-driven beers and our juiced beer, which gets its lactic acid also from a GMO source. And I'm gonna say we should be promoting like flights to this whole thing.
100%.
I'm not just getting old. Like time actually is moving faster. It was not that long ago that I was being sent out to do a beer demo at a natural food store in Berkeley. And I've probably told this story when Kyle from Lalamon was on, and they're like, yeah, take out these various beers. And it included our beer Juiced, which uses Lalamon's lactic acid producing yeast, Sourvissier, which we enjoy. And I'm an absent-minded fellow, and I just seemed to forget that beer because I thought that if I showed up in a natural food store in Berkeley with that beer, I was going to be tarred and feathered. Organic tar, synthetic feathers, I'm sure. And when I arrived, their beer buyer's like, oh, you forgot the Juiced. I'll just pull some off the shelf and give it to you. And I'm like, yo, is this working over here? I was actually pretty skeptical of GMO stuff a very long time ago. And I was skeptical of it in beer. And I had listened to various beer scholars talk about GMO yeast like existing, like they had tasted it. They had tasted beers with it, and it was cool, but they didn't know when some brewery was going to like make the leap and start putting that stuff out there. And there I find myself pouring, it was a raspberry beer that we made, and it looked beautiful, so it was really attracting people. It was bright red. This was juiced raspberry. Yeah. And people are like, I want to try that raspberry beer. And I'm like, oh, wait, God, it's got GMOs in it. Like, I was reacting like I would if I saw like a 5-year-old like picking up a glass of wine at a party. I was like, whoa, no. And as some guy with a gray ponytail wearing rainbow socks in Birkenstocks is knocking this beer back. I'm like, that's a GMO yeast. He's like, it's fine. It's great beer. And I'm all, hey, if you're cool, I'm cool. So we have traveled so far from like, yes, it's theoretically possible, but the market would never support it, to, yeah, we can try it, but it's going to piss some people off, to, yo, this is a fantastic, very unremarkable tool in the brewer's toolkit for creating great flavor. And that has happened, I feel like, in the blink of an eye.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
I for sure have remember not only being in school or being at conferences where they were talking about mostly the agronomics of barley.
Yeah.
And talking about GMO. And it was a pretty blank, don't think anyone's ever going to support this.
Right.
Like Budweiser, I'm pretty sure at some point in time, wouldn't allow GMO rice to be planted anywhere near their rice fields.
Right.
And so to have that blanket statement of there's no way that this is going to work for a while. And I mean, a lot of it was to try and encourage education for consumers that this isn't these are steps that we might have to take.
Right.
Not just want to take, but this might things we might have to do.
Right.
It's kind of interesting that it came through, it seems more mostly in yeast, which no one seemed to think of, even though it's probably one of the best understood genomics, right?
I feel like it's got to be easier to play with a yeast than to play with an entire corn or barley plant.
And I suppose we've been messing with the genomics of yeast just by stressing it out or selecting here or So it is kind of curious that through my career, the GMO discussion was always about barley.
Yeah.
And now that it's come out in yeast and it creates these wild flavors and interesting things that it seems to be taken much more gently.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's no yeast left in the beer.
Right.
But yeah, it's been an interesting full circle on how perception of it has changed.
Right.
Absolutely. For the record, Rainbow Socks and Birkenstocks is a great beer name. We should write that down.
That is a great beer name. And yet, once again, I'm throwing absolutely zero shade on that gentleman's fashion choices. They just communicated to me an individual who would shy away from anything GMO and perhaps not even be open to the conversation about the yays, nays, pros and cons.
100%. I mean, from my limited understanding of the subject, I think it's positive for the future, for the human race, for the environment. I mean, we have been selectively breeding animals, and we do the same thing with plants, and, now we're doing it on an engineering, the genetics level of things. And if it can make the world a better place, I'm all for it, especially if we're starting with a delicious glass of beer. If you can make the glass of beer even more delicious, that's a great start.
I think the discussions about genetically modified things also shouldn't just simply be black and white.
Totally.
There's not you're either for it or not for it. There's definitely all the shades of gray in between.
All the shades.
Yeah. Shut up. I'll be honest, I don't think, you should be able to dump as much pesticides and all those things on cotton just to grow cotton cheaply,
Right.
So there's definitely the pluses and the minuses of all kinds of the, and I think that's the thing too. There used to be a lot of people that would just immediately shut it down, nope.
Right.
At least it's now I think this introducing the concept through beer, through apples, through all these things that are normal. I think it allows for more conversation and a little bit more deeper understanding of both sides of the coin, as opposed to just being, a hard no or a hard yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And, in a sense, man's best friend is a GMO. It's the first GMO, right? Dogs.
Yeah.
I wake up every morning to my little GMO scratching the side of the bed, hungry for breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the third or fourth beer that we've used Vermont Tropics in now?
Shucks, this year.
Yeah.
Big Chicken, Many Worlds, Holographic, Synth Life, to be followed up by that incredible beer.
Yeah.
We are calling it Super Highly Confluential our annual Hoptacular collaboration, our celebratory cerveza with the good people of the NorCal Beer Geeks.
Proud member right here.
Some of the best damn beer fans anywhere.
Yeah, let's give it a try. Let's see what adding a bunch of hops to it might change the experience.
This is really exciting. This represents a significant reformulation of Super Highly Confluential because the beer geeks keep their tongue to the pulse of modern American flavor creation, and it's important that we keep up because if we lose the geeks, what do we got?
Exactly.
Where are we?
Yeah.
Got to stay in touch.
If you're not impressing the vanguard, you're impressing nobody.
That's what I've always loved about HenHouse is I feel like HenHouse has the finger on the pulse of what people want, And if you live at the top of the bell curve, you come with the populist mindset, you're gonna make some fans. You're gonna impress more people that way.
Yeah, and if I can restate yet another tired story I've told a bunch of times, but not to Nick. When we were first rolling out, we have a series of beers that we call our In Theory beers, and those were the first beers to experiment with these yeasts, not exclusively from y'all, but mostly from y'all. And when it was first proposed to me as part of the marketing department, like we're doing another line of IPAs, and I was like, why? Do we really need to? We have a bunch of IPAs that kind of don't fit into a line. Those pop up all the time. We have our fabulous rotating conspiracy series of beers. We've got our big mouth beers that we call them. These are all great IPAs that are brewed in different ways and that distinguish themselves from each other and super good and super fun. So let's get a third rotating line of IPAs going. And I was like, well, I mean, I want us all to keep eating and having health insurance. So yeah, okay. But I don't really know what we're doing. And then, oh my God, the recipe started coming out of production. And I was seeing all this cutting edge stuff oh, we're brewing this one with an unnamed experimental yeast. I'm like, all right, I am totally on board with this. This isn't a cynical repackaging of Mosaic to try and make it into a cash grab. This is actually something brand new that's going to taste different from other beers and just start telling a new story about beer to people. That's amazing.
Yeah, I do remember when that first came down, it was well, what do you do?
How do you make them different?
We want it juicy. We want it to be between these ABVs. And you're like, that's almost every beer we make.
Here's 7. We do that already.
So it did take some time to be so how do we differentiate this? What do we possibly do? And so I think part of that was we saw the Berkeley Yeast, some of those strains happening, something called aromazyme.
Yep.
Which we might actually kind of come back to because we started using it in all the in all the beers, and I was well, we're starting to de-differentiate the things we were differentiating.
Right.
Which was really interesting too. Different, I don't remember the science behind aromazyme, honestly, but that is a whole different enzyme and a whole different set of compounds.
Right. Doing similar stuff though.
Yeah, it's releasing sugar units off of terpenes, so it's releasing terpene alcohols like geraniol, linalool.
Right.
Yeah, and that was so we started with 2 batches of the Shaning of all things and dosed one with aromazyme, and I was like,
wow,
oh, shit, this is different. I'm like, all right, well, let's mess with this.
Yeah.
And so it was well, there's not too much we could do with hops that we haven't done,
Right.
So it was well, why not try yeast and not just normal yeast, but yeast that they're just starting to get a
yeast.
foothold. Yeah, future yeast.
Yeah.
Helping develop the future.
It was pretty wild. And I must say, I do enjoy Berry Jammer.
Thank you. I wanted to get into Berry Jammer. I apologize to our engineer for that table pound, but man, I've been thinking about Berry Jammer since Nick first walked through the door.
Man,
yeah.
I honestly, it was one of those days where...
Oh yeah, you guys did brew with it.
Yes,
That's right.
hell yeah.
Because we wanted, because one of the, it was another one of these
The
beers.
first many worlds, I believe.
First holographic print.
First holographic, right?
Yeah.
And I was how do we differentiate? We wanted it to be berry forward. And I was well, how do we get extra berry forward? That's when we called you up. I was
I tried to warn you.
You
Yeah,
said, well,
it's gonna
it's
be a lot.
very
Yeah.
Some people love it, some people hate it. There's no one in between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we brewed with it,
And that's what it was, right?
oh,
some
it
people
was-
love it, some people
Yes.
hate it, and no one in between.
I'm pretty sure I was there. Everyone had kind of gone for the day. I was just wrapping up. I was oh, I wanted to try that before we dry hop it. And I remember drinking that out of the fermenter and being oh my God. It's Captain Crunch all berries.
Yeah.
This is incredible. I mean, it definitely has you're very upfront about it, kind of that synthetic raspberry flavor, but it was boom.
Yeah.
I thought it was fun and interesting and fantastic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even mind thinking about going back to it, but maybe like co-fermenting. So if you can kind of like tamp it down a little bit, but still like get it in there.
Does it exist anymore?
We're making it. We're making some tweaks. We're making it more complex. So adding in some auxiliary flavors, maybe a little bit of acidity.
Ooh.
So stay tuned. I was actually just talking to one of our scientists today who was telling me about some of the new yeast strains that we're making that are in that berry realm. I don't know. So keep you posted.
Call us up if you need fermentations. Like I'm
good.
so on board
Sounds
with
good.
playing with that because I thought it was really cool. Some people really hated it, including some people that sell the beer. So
Yeah.
I think I got trumped
I hear
on
you.
some of
So
my.
there's about 140 of us at HenHouse right now, and I think probably 30% of the Berry Jammer fans are at this table right now.
Nice.
And
Yeah, if Jessica's working today, she's a huge fan as well.
Yeah, all
Absolutely
right.
love that beer.
we got like a quorum now. But yeah, I really, really liked it. Me and my boss Sayer, who's on vacation right now, we drove it to a really neat beer fest in Reno called the Biggest Little Invitational, and they were like, just try and like bring something special. Like that's kind of what we want. And I'm like, yo. So we brought a bunch of really special stuff, and Holographic was brand spanking new. I think we poured that sixtel there before the cans and draft were released in the Bay Area, and I really liked it. And Sayer didn't think he was going to like it, and he did not. But I did. I was totally here for that. And something Sayer and I were talking
every
about,
time. Yeah,
dude, like a dark beer, like a porter or a stout, like a fruited dark beer.
that was like my next, like the next thing for that yeast strain is definitely a dark beer, right? How fun is it? Like one of my first home brews that was not terrible, or a brown ale, was of course something dark. And I threw a bunch of raspberries in it. I was like, oh man. And that stuck with me for a long time. And that's a pretty popular thing, right? Like berries and chocolate, like it's a perfect combination. And I always had that in the back of my mind that might be a really fun way to use that yeast or one of these newer yeasts in like to differentiate like a beer like that without having to put any fruit in it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I remember the days of mixing together Shadow of a Doubt and Frambois for the Cure. I forget what they called that, but
Sacrilege?
I used to drink. To some, maybe. To others, it was innovation. Pure innovation.
No, that sounds really good.
Yeah, exciting stuff on the horizon at Berkeley Yeast over there, Nick. I hear you were talking to one of your scientists. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what's next for the future of Berkeley Yeast?
Well, so what we've done recently is we've released an entire line of tropic strains. So we now have a lager strain, which is super cool for either just, tropical pilsners or for cold IPAs. If you're into that thing.
Yes, we are.
We have.
And you have a Kveik Tropics.
We have a Kveik Tropics. The lager strain is also diacetyl free, so it's also keeping diacetyl below flavor threshold during the entire course of fermentation. So you don't need to do that free rising. You can just let it chill at 52 degrees and then crash. So I think we're probably gonna, keep on pushing the diacetyl free line of strains. Those are kind of no-brainers to me. I think they ferment identically to the parental strain. So, like the Vermont one or the Conan one.
Right.
It's the same thing as Conan or Vermont, but just keeps diacetyl below flavor threshold during the entire course of fermentation. So with dry hopping, typically we see beers have a big spike in diacetyl potential, so producing acetolactate, the precursor to diacetyl. And then in given bad conditions, like somebody sets the beer on the counter for an hour at their buddy's house before getting into the fridge, it can turn into a diacetyl bomb or butter bomb.
Right.
And so anyways, the whole lineup are diacetyl free strains. I think we might push more on. And then I think we'll just keep on going with tropical flavors and creating more tropical complexity, as well as doing more investigations into which hops and barley types and other grains and other things that people can add into beer to really push thiols. And so I think that some of what we're going to be doing is just building a resource for brewers so that they can make good decisions about how to push the beer in the direction that they want, it to go in.
Direct conversations with hop companies, hop growers? Like I know, like Yakima Chief has quite an extensive, their laboratories are pretty impressive. Do you guys have direct conversations with them about, because I know they measure some of this stuff?
We talked to them a little bit. We collaborate a little bit with VGF, Virgil Gamache Farms. But we've also invested a lot in equipment in-house. So we now have LCMS or different types of mass spectrometry. So We have, liquid chromatograph mass specs. We have gas chromatograph mass specs. So we can look for pretty much anything in-house that is in beer or that's relevant to, beer brewing and drinking. So we don't need to do too many collaborations in that realm, but I think we'll be collaborating with hop growers in the near future. We have a grant with the USDA. And so we're working with Tom Shellhammer up at Oregon State University.
Awesome.
And so, right now we're really just trying to identify hops that have a lot of these precursors and then develop yeast strains that can push them to be more tropical. So again, just kind of making the hop industry more robust via genetic engineering and yeast.
Right.
Awesome.
And then the one other thing that I should mention is maybe a few months out on the horizon is we're developing a thiol precursor product as well. Working name right now is Thiol Boost.
Cool.
Derek from Moxa came up with the name.
Shouts to Derek.
So that'll be an easy way for brewers to really push thiols, as much as you probably would ever want in a beer. Very easily. Yeah.
Our friend Connor at Cellar Maker Brewing, he has a beer that might be an even better name than Thiol Boost, which is Suzanne Sommer's Thiol Master.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That beer used the very first version of Thiol Boost. So that
Awesome.
was done with London Tropics,
right?
And it was a collaboration with Derek from Moxa,
Awesome.
or the Moxa guys.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was used in it, and then that's when Derek started brainstorming. So during that collaboration, I was like, "What should we call this thing?" Because it was literally just a bottle of purified precursors from plants that we brought over there, and he's like Thiol Boost.
Awesome.
But that would be a good name for it. It's a little long.
It's a little long,
but
it's clunky.
It
sticks with you.
We're into long names here, so that's
certainly
that beer was wild. We measured it, and it had about 100 micrograms per liter of 3MH. So
amazing.
Probably 10 times what's in this. Yeah, and really a lot of passion fruit, guava flavor coming from that beer.
Wow.
Pretty wild.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. All I can think of is no thiols, no masters, but I don't think
That's pretty good too.
I don't know if that makes sense,
It wouldn't be, wouldn't be a great beer though,
No, right. If it's missing the thiols.
Yeah, it's missing the thiols. It's interesting with Synth Life, like my first time drinking it, it felt weird to me, and I couldn't kind of put my finger on it. And what it is I figured this out before I started drinking Super Highly Confluential, but all of that aroma is telling my brain that there's going to be some hop bitterness on the way, and it's not. It's not on the way.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Very, very few alpha acids were isomerized in the making of that beautiful blonde ale. And once I kind of acclimated to that, it was just really, really good. I still can't wait for this beer to actually be out so I can drink as much of it as I want.
When I was photographing this beer, I set it up, walked 10 feet away, I could still smell it.
Oh,
I
definitely.
was just like, oh my God, this beer is incredible. You know?
I had a question about like the stability of these compounds, right? Because I know that the thiols in general, right, are somewhat, but is there any difference from them coming from hops versus coming from like this? Like, do you have this is one of the, I'm super excited about this beer because we're going to be tasting it, through its lifespan.
Yeah.
To see how it changes, how long it lasts. Like, is this a way to make hoppy beer a little hoppier for a little bit longer?
More shelf stable.
Yeah, it could be. So different thiols, they are readily oxidized. So if you have a good packaging line, that really helps. Metals can also accelerate oxidation, so specifically copper. And I believe that copper is used a lot in agriculture. So it could be that if you're getting these thiols via agricultural products, that you could see them drop off a little bit faster. But I haven't done the experiment to know if that's true or not. I can tell you, though, that we have analyzed beers fermented with tropics and done time course experiments where we've looked at degradation over a period of a month, including post-packaging. And what we see is that 3MH, so the alcohol form of one of these thiols, is fairly stable over a period of a month at least. But 3MHA, the ester form, which again has a lower flavor threshold, so might have more of an impact overall with flavor, that drops off pretty quickly. And it's unclear right now if it's that the thiol part of it, the sulfur-containing part, is being oxidized, which is the typical route for degradation,
Right.
or if it's just that it's being hydrolyzed or broken apart. So, because an ester is just an alcohol and an acid that have formed together.
Right.
And so they can readily break apart. And so it could be that, and that happens more frequently or to a greater extent or more, quicker in acidic environments like beer. Beers, this is probably what, pH 4.2, somewhere around there. So,
4.5 maybe.
4.5.
Yeah.
Below 4.6. Yeah, so that could be as well, but we haven't investigated it thoroughly enough.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm very curious to see.
Fascinating.
Because it's like
Yeah.
obviously these aren't like studies, but people are like, oh yeah, I was like, after like a couple weeks, like language, which is our, the one that uses the London one.
Yeah.
It's like really opens up, and like, I mean, what that means, I don't know. But like some people really start to enjoy them almost a little more.
Yeah.
With a little
Yeah.
bit of age on them, which is just kind of interesting. So
Yeah.
it's something we want to kind of like keep track of and like just
Yeah,
kind of taste
absolutely.
through. And
I mean,
see how it goes.
we'd be happy to analyze these beers as well if you ever want to send beers down. I know you guys have sent us some materials for looking at precursors,
Yeah.
but which we'll still do. But we could also track some of these beers as well, and just to see what's going on with the thiols.
Oh,
And it could be the
absolutely.
other. We can look at terpenes as well. We can look at different esters with these mass specs. You can look at a whole assortment
Yeah.
of compounds. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how other compounds are falling off over time as well, and if the thiols are degrading, or if it's just that everything else is dropping off, but the thiols are staying the same. So it's a ratio. It's really hard to say.
That would be
but
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Heck yeah.
what kind of stuff are you guys cooking up? Like, where do you see, just because the way this business has changed, like Berkeley Yeast has changed so much in terms of like what you guys offer, and then adoption in the industry has to have changed colossally. I'd be curious to know what you kind of think is coming down the road next for Berkeley Yeast. And I'm also curious if you're keeping an eye on what I'm going to call fermentation sciences, which used to, I feel like a bunch of years ago, just meant studying food. But now, like, we were working a thing at the Cal Academy of Arts, and I was talking to some guys who were using yeast to ferment. I can't remember. It was either acetaminophen or ibuprofen. It was definitely one of those two. And they were working on that. Is there anything, aside from, like, how y'all are going to keep growing and changing and making beer even better, is there anything that you as, like, a yeast product enthusiast are keeping an eye on
Yeah.
out in the world?
Good. Yeah, great question. I think in terms of beer, it will largely come from what brewers tell us. So,
Sure.
In large part, the strains that we have right now and the strains that we'll have in the future are dictated by, what Mike tells us that we should make.
Right.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I feel powerful.
Yeah. So
Drunk with
I think
power
it's
over here, Mike.
Yeah, it's the brewers, that are in it every single day and following the trends and identifying new problems that could potentially be solved, by genetic engineering. Those are the things we'll probably tackle. So, for instance, if you said like oxidation is a huge thing, or shelf
Yeah.
stability, or more stable haze, just to throw out a few things, like,
Right.
you might be able to address those from genetic engineering. Maybe not, but probably. So I think that's probably where we will go beyond just pushing more tropical flavors and
Sure.
amplifying thiols, because I think that's probably not just a fad. I think it's here to stay. Not like the brewed IPA. And
I almost smashed the tip.
We love you, Kim.
Kim says hi, by the way. He was at Pints and Paws with me last week.
right on.
Awesome.
And then in other industries, yeast is used all over the place. It's used in bread making. I think that it could be in coffee. There are a lot of applications
Right.
where fermentation is used. And, while we focused a lot on yeast for the first, several years of this company, I could see one day expanding beyond yeast, but probably not into barley. Plants just take so long to grow. So
Yeah.
those experiments are on a whole different timeline. With yeast, we can make changes extremely quickly. Like if you have an idea that's easy, meaning maybe there's one gene that's already known, we can make it happen in like a month, But
Wow.
from ideation to creation. But if it's, if you're talking about manipulating a hop plant or a barley plant, or even worse, like poplar or something like that.
Sure.
Which some people do, those PhDs take a long time when you're studying poplar.
And I've
red
seen
wheat.
at like OSU, they have a barley breeding program, and it's not like there's traditional breeding, but there is also like it's been a long time, but there's like triploid type stuff. So
Yeah.
it's they're taking things before they've become seed.
Yeah.
And then like spreading them out and growing single plants, and it's pretty remarkable. And like some of those, it's been a minute since I've been up there and kind of walked through their fields and whatnot. But yeah, they a lot of students up there also like to drink beer. Dr. Shellhammer's up there as well. So
Yeah.
they were comparing like agronomics plus like flavor, malted versus unmalted, and it's pretty remarkable what they can do like with a barley plant these days too, and not have to like, grow it here, then grow it somewhere in the southern hemisphere, then grow it up here. Then they can turn a variety around. It used to be like 15 years, and now they've kind of like shrunk that window down, which is pretty cool too.
That's super exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine that genetic engineering will extend into barley and hops. I know it already happens to some extent, but I imagine maybe that will be the next thing, is engineering, not for us probably, but for somebody else, is engineering plants to maybe create more of these precursors for thiols, for instance, or produce other precursor compounds that might not normally be there that could be converted by yeast. So you don't have to build out an entire biochemical pathway in one organism. You can use multiple ones. So maybe it's that the plants do half of it and then the yeast does the other half.
Yeah, the yeast takes it over the finish line.
Yeah, sharing the metabolic load,
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Metabolic
Share the load. Lord of the Rings.
That's a future beer for the next 10 years. Share the metabolic load.
That's not a bad one, actually. Do we have any final remarks that anyone wants to share?
I say this beer is super awesome. The super highly confluential. What I noticed is that I still taste a lot of the thiols.
Yeah.
It's less obvious on the nose, and I noticed that quite a bit in a lot of beers that have a lot of hops in them. Is that you can still taste the thiols, but they do get a little bit washed out with the hops. So
Right.
but still super delicious, and I think the thiols are adding to the overall complexity of the beer, but they're not at the forefront. They're not dominating the whole show.
Right.
Like you could probably pour this for somebody at a campfire and they have no idea what's going on. They wouldn't know. But Synth Life, obviously something different is going on there. It's the thiols.
It's very striking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Mike, you were saying like some people thought it was too much. Even it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And the only difference really is this one has a lot of hops on top. I mean, beyond like ABV and all that. But
Mike's kind of like the Marty McFly in the lab. Like, your kids are going to love it.
And I love, I am very excited about playing with this and probably tweaking this beer a little bit.
Cool.
There's definitely things I would like to add there. Just like any beer that we make. But yeah, very excited about this project. Very excited about see where it goes. And I'm glad to finally meet you in person.
You all as well.
Yeah, Nick, you're
been
awesome,
fantastic.
man. We're really stoked on Berkeley Yeast and future collabs with HenHouse.
Super stoked on you guys, and I'm always down to collaborate. And you guys are pretty much in our backyard. It was like a 40-minute drive.
Not too bad. Yeah.
I mean, everything in the Bay Area is like at least 20 minutes. So like,
Yeah.
it's not.
Not too bad at all.
100%. And please send our love to the rest of the molecular manipulating mavericks of Berkeley
Will
Yeast.
do.
Yeah.
Will do. Yeah.
My man, with that great alliteration. Yeah, I think between May 17th and June 17th, we'll have somewhere like around 4 or 5
awesome.
Tropics beers coming out.
Cool.
It's really exciting.
Yeah, it could be a good time for a little
Party
with Berkeley Yeast. Come out on a little
Let's do it.
fun times.
Absolutely. You guys are always invited to come down to us as well.
Oh, yeah.
We have 2 facilities now. We have our R&D facility in Oakland, and then the manufacturing, or where we grow all the yeast, is now in San Jose. We're in the old Gig Yeast spot. So that's where the magic is happening.
Cool.
That's a company outing I want to be a part of for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely.
down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tag marketing if the lab's doing that, okay?
Yeah, I'm going to throw the nerds in the bus. We're going to
100%.
figure that out for sure.
Yeah, we would love to all come down here. Be awesome.
Yeah, we'll definitely reach out if we do get that flight together. I think that would be a great thing. Awesome. Cheers.
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 And now, Sensory First.
Welcome to Sensory First, where we get deep under the hood of the beers of the HenHouse Brewing Company. I am Bob from the marketing department, here with two of the biggest brains on the team. We've got
Brewmaster Zach Kelly
and the incredible
Mike Guilford, Director of Quality.
Yeah, and we are sitting down with Synth Life Blonde Ale. Definitely one of the most fascinating beers I've ever tasted, period. And one of the most fascinating beers I've ever tasted coming out of our brew house. Really simple malt bill, incredibly gentle Cascade Hops edition, and a whole lot of exciting action coming from carboxyl lysase enzymes releasing all of this incredible Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc character. I'm so excited about this beer. Y'all, how did this miracle happen? What is going on here?
I mean, it's kind of crazy. Berkeley Yeast produced these crazy new yeast strains. Biotransformation is one of the things that's really hip right now. And like normal yeast strains do this. However, Berkeley Yeast likes to amp it up, right? They tinker. And they actually found a gene in a bacteria and stuck it in some yeast. And it makes beer explode with flavor, basically. It isolates a single compound and releases all this like guava, passion fruit kind of aroma. So it's wild stuff.
It's a really, really neat beer. And it's so interesting that like these are the flavors that it creates. It to me is such a really like Australian, New Zealand hop character or New Zealand Sauv Blanc character super loudly. And that's fun. It's super fun. And this is not to me a Cascade Hops experience.
No, not at all. And I mean, you can't experience it. Like you really have to drink this beer.
You really have to drink this beer.
Like it is 100% Pilsner malt and the tiniest bit of Cascade in the whirlpool.
Yeah.
A little bit in the mash, which may or may not do actually anything. Probably gives a little bit of bitterness, and that's about it. But
sure.
Yeah. Yeast forward flavors that's not actually from the yeast is something different. And I mean, the approach to this beer was like, what is the baseline? Like, what is the most basic thing we can do to let this yeast kind of shine?
Right.
And so the lighter the malt you go, the higher the precursor potential. So it's taking these precursors, turns them into aromas and flavors. And the lighter the roast on the barley, the higher that precursor potential. So
fascinating.
So that's why I went with the Pilsner malt. Actually, I was going to target just 2-row because that's what we use in everything.
Right.
But happen to have some Barca Pils, which is a fabulous malt. So
We do love the Barca Pils around here.
There's very small amount of research on how much precursor is available in different hop compounds. Saaz and Cascade is two that is known.
Yeah.
And we have all kinds of samples out that eventually we will know how much precursor is in those.
Right.
So just went with Cascade and figured, well, why not? It's a blonde ale.
Yeah.
Seems like a reasonable thing to do. And flavors are not Pilsner and not Cascade.
Yeah, it's amazing. Let's back it up a little into that mash hopping. Talk about that technique. What were we hoping to get out of that? I think the only other mash hopped beer I've ever had that I know was mash hopped, or at least is Hoptimum from Sierra Nevada. And a while back, Zach and I were talking, and I completely confused mash hopping with first wort hopping, which are totally different. Mm-hmm. But this was mash hopping. This is hops and grain, just kicking it.
So there's some other yeast strains out there that utilize different enzymes to kind of do what we've done in this beer.
Right.
And if you mash hop, there's a lot of proteolytic activity from the grain that can actually work on the hops. And so you get conversion between certain compounds that then makes it available to some of these other yeast strains to convert those.
Wow.
We were told it wouldn't matter, but I figured, hey, why not?
Yeah.
Also, you still get some like alpha acids that come through, so it does lend to a little bit of like a bittering addition, but it's like maybe 20% or something like that. It's like really low utilization, but it's there. So figured might as well go for it, 11 pounds into, like 1,600 pounds of malt kind of a thing. So very small amount. Yeah. So kind of just let it rip in there.
Right. It's really neat. And like once you cut through all of this aroma, which you can like cut through with a fork, you don't fully need a knife to cut through it, but a fork for sure. Then you have like a lovely blonde ale underneath. It's like super drinkable, really low in bitterness. 4.8%, just really nice.
Yeah, I think it's a great starting place too to like really make this shine. Like this gives us the groundwork to like how do you build different beers around.
Right.
This? How do you build an IPA that has this remarkable character and just add a little bit more in?
Yeah. What kind of temperatures does this yeast like? does fermentation temp like affect the way it does its magic? Because I feel like this is different than our usual yeast temperature control.
Gotta be honest,
Maybe?
that's a really great question. It's fermented kind of at what we would ferment a Conan beer at. You know, it's
Right.
68 degrees. So normal ale temperatures, but I don't honestly know if you were to ferment it cooler or warmer, if you would get more activity. I mean, generally, the higher the temperature, the more, this is enzyme.
The more stuff happens.
Yeah, it's more enzyme driven. So like
Right.
higher temperatures, generally, as long as you're not denaturing it,
Right.
creates more activity. So not really sure.
Yeah.
And plus, you would still get all the other compounds that you would from a higher, if you ferment at higher temperatures, you get a lot more actual yeast character, so the Conan character might come through more.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's kind of ferment at your quote unquote normal temperatures to get all the activity.
Right. I mean, this is the future. Like I tell when I'm training tasting room folks all the time, I say it's always okay to say, I don't know. And I'm going to try and find that out. And in this case, we're saying we don't know, but we're going to wait for the whole of humanity to continue to develop brewing science and genetically modified yeast. And then eventually we will know, probably.
Perhaps.
Or like there'll be some weird hop creep thing that confuses everybody again.
Who knows? And then we'll do something different and then we'll have more questions. So
Yeah.
that's what it's about, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's about. This is all science. Brewmaster Zach Kelly, any final words on this totally confoundingly delicious beer?
Yeah. One, congratulations, Mike, on a successful, fun, weird science experiment. And it'll now, all the questions that we've talked about now, fermentation temp and all this other interesting stuff really makes me think that we should start messing more with this. So maybe some future synthetic development will have to come. But I think as far as like just developing this beer and like tasting this beer, there's no way that if you put this in a lineup, you would be able to tell that this is something that had like just this extremely faint amount of hops in it. It's crystal clear, nice, decent head retention, nice white fluffy head. Not huge, but nice, like really small bubbles on it. Really big on that, like that New Zealand white wine, that the Marlborough or the Two Paddocks.
Yeah.
Perhaps I haven't had any Sam Neill's wine, but shout out to Sam Neill.
Shout out to Sam Neill.
Very dry, but just like a little bit of sweet backbone on it. Pretty well balanced and just really easy, cool beer to drink. Like really interesting stuff, and it's fun to just like drink a regular blonde ale, that's like got so much weird complexity on the back end and the background.
Because it doesn't have the bitterness that the hop aroma, which is like barley aroma, is setting me up to expect. And then that doesn't come through. Like if this popped up on like a Cicerone tasting exam and they asked me to like figure out where this beer fits, my answer would be, I would like to go home. Can I go home, please? That's it. Like, I love that we're this far out on the cutting edge, and this is going to be a great beer for blonde lovers, a great beer for hopheads, and like pretty much a beer that everybody over 21 years of age or older has got to give a try. Yeah.
Welcome to the future of blonde.
Right? This is fabulous. Cheers.
Cheers.
HenHouse Unruffled was created by Anna Scott. We record at HenHouse Brewing Company's Palace of Barrels in Petaluma, California. Our producer is Brian Henderson, and our associate producers are Josh Staples and Fridge. The music you've been listening to was written and performed by our San Francisco account rep McLean from his album Speechless and Speechless 2, which you can find on Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, and anywhere one finds dope music. If you have a question or comment about this or any episode of HenHouse Unruffled, please let us know by calling 707-347-9425 to leave a message. You can also send an email to podcast@henhousebrewing.com. For more information, visit www.henhousebrewing.com or stop by one of our Bay Area tasting rooms. The voice you've been listening to is Imani Russell Black. Please listen and drink responsibly.